Many of you I know were here Wednesday night when we had the opening for the Lynching in Maryland exhibit, which is spectacular and which we've worked for so long. That is like a dream come true. That evening I neglected to thank some people, and I want to make sure I do it right now. I want to thank Crystal Turner and Kaylin Dodson, who put together a wonderful event. Carol Johnson, who's always a rock with the museum. The people at Quatrefoil, who did a spectacular job to create that beautiful exhibit. And I want to also thank Terri Freeman, the president of the museum, without whose leadership and vision, none of that could have happened. And I'm indebted to her. And I would like to invite Terri up here right now to say hello.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you again. It feels like it was just yesterday because it was just like 3 days ago. But we are always happy to have people in the space that really understand why we do what we do. That the mission of the museum is twofold in many ways. We are a museum that collects and interprets and preserves. But we are also a space that wants to present exhibits and programs and conversations that challenge, that are bold, that make you think. And in fact, if when you leave this space, you aren't thinking about something that you learned, then we haven't done our job. Our goal is to push, to provoke. You don't always have to like it, that's okay. Sometimes that's how we get to where we need to be. But I do think the idea of coming into a space like this, that I always say you're surrounded by beauty, is a wonderful way to wrap yourself up in learning. And so it has been truly a labor of love, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, working on this project and bringing this to fruition. So it has been a pleasure. I know I have more work to do around this, but we are so happy that you are here in this space. I know that you will have time today at some point, I think, to be able and see the exhibit and how it fits with everything else that is in our permanent history as we focus on the history of Black people here in Maryland. And this fits so well with regard to that history. Unfortunately, it still also fits with the present. And I think that's the next step. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Terri. And I would just want to remind everyone to turn their the cell phone drill. Let's do that now. Since we've been doing this conference, we begin the day by reading the names of the men and boys who we remember today. And so, helping with that honor today are Derek Tabor, Roxanne Red Wallace, and Amy Mill. Roxanne is with the Harford County Coalition. Derek is Montgomery County. Amy is one of the leaders of the Baltimore County Lynching Memorial Project and keeps this whole machine running. She's also the treasurer of our board. So, whenever you're ready.
David Thomas, 1854. Frederick Pierce, 1861. Jim Wilson, 1862. John Fields, 1863. Isaac Moore, 1868. Jim Quinn, 1869. Thomas Jurix, 1869. John Jones, 1872. John Henry Scott, 1875. John Sims, 1875. Mike Green, 1878. James Carroll, 1879. George W. Peck, 1880.
John Diggs Dorsey, 1880. George Briscoe, 1884. Townsend Cook, 1885. Howard Cooper, 1885. Charles Whitley, 1886. Benjamin Hance, 1887. John H. Figgis, 1887. Asbury Green, 1891. James Taylor, 1892. Isaac Kemp, 1894. Stephen Williams, 1894. Jacob Henson, Jr., 1895. James Bowens, 1895.
Sidney Randolph, 1896. William Andrews, 1897. Garfield King, 1898. Wright Smith, 1898. Lewis Harris, 1900. Henry Davis, 1906. James Reed, 1907. William Burns, 1907. King Johnson, 1911. Matthew Williams, 1931. Unknown, 1931. George Armwood, 1933.
May their memories be a blessing. Thank you all. So, 6 years ago, in the fall of 2018, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project held our very first conference in this room. We didn't call it an annual conference, then because, we really had no idea whether or not there'd be another. But today we're holding our seventh annual conference. So we're happy for that. Thank you. So, 6 years doesn't really seem like a long time, at least at my age, but, we have all together accomplished an incredible amount of work since then. And I want to just highlight a few things just to remind everyone of what's happened. So we now have coalitions in 14 of the 17 counties where we know lynchings took place. And we had a hand in creating most of them. There were none when we started. There have been soil collections in 24 at 24 of the 38 known lynching sites in the state. That is sacred ground, and it is focused. It is the feature of the a new exhibit that I'm sure you'll all get a chance to see today. EJI historic markers have been installed in 5 locations around the state, acknowledging 11 known victims. 3 other historical markers were installed last year in Montgomery County, 2 by the Montgomery County Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation, and 1 by Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project that we helped fund. There are additional marker installations, by the way, that are being planned in at least 2 other counties right now. We provide, there was no, where am I? There was no, the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It didn't exist when we held our first conference. And the commission relies on our coalitions to fulfill its mandate for public hearings. We provide additional support to the commission, including the first public hearing that we had in 2019. It was the first time the commission actually presented itself in public, and that was we held that at UB Law. Many of you might have been there. Cheryl and Eiffel spoke there. Delegate Pena Melnick spoke there, and one of our speakers today was there. We have created a digital archive for records and artifacts connected to the known lynchings in Maryland. We helped fund the Maryland Lynching Oral History Project, which included training people at local coalition members that enabled them to conduct the interviews in their home counties. We and the coalitions offer, as you know, a robust schedule of public programming around the topic of racial terror and other social justice issues. There's film panels, book panels, town halls, bus tours, you name it. The state of Maryland a couple of years ago actually formally and officially acknowledged its failure to protect and provide due process for the 33 men and one 15-year-old boy who were in legal custody at the time of their lynchings. And the other night, you may recall, there was a question asked about how young people could be exposed to this history. And I just want to point out that effort to have the pardons announced and taken care of, that was started by a group of 6th graders at a school in Baltimore County. That is how it began. So it's never too early. A few days ago, of course, we opened up the permanent exhibit on lynching in Maryland, which you'll learn more about later today, and which I trust you'll have an opportunity to visit. And I just want you to think for a minute of what this means and how important it is that Maryland has this site now, this installation. It's something we've been pursuing for a long time, and just to see it, to stand in it, is I can't really even talk about it still. It is so moving, and it's just so impressive. The change happens. It's insidious, but it happens. And on your program, in your programs, there's like a washed out image kind of on the inside of the thing. That was the installation. That was at the installation of the first EJI marker in Anne Arundel County. That was in September, I think, of 2019. And I just want to point out that event was attended by hundreds of people, and that is the county where there were more racial terror lynchings than any other county in Maryland. There were 5 lynchings in Anne Arundel County. So change is insidious, right? And none of this would have been possible without you guys. None of it existed before, and all of that has been achieved since our first conference and today. But you made it possible because you've made this issue a priority in your lives, and you've been vocal, you've supported your county coalitions and us, and because of your willingness, your insistence even, to confront a very difficult and painful history. And more Marylanders are learning the truth about racial terror and the white supremacy that fuels it and continues to fuel it. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of you people that made it possible, and I'm proud of the state for the progress that's been made on this front. Now, yesterday we had a meeting of coalition leaders from the state, but also we were joined yesterday by folks who are involved in this work in Virginia and in North Carolina, and they came here because of what we're doing in Maryland. People, I think, in the state sometimes don't appreciate how how respected we are for the work that we're doing on the truth and reconciliation front. We've really created a culture of accountability here, and it's healthy and it's necessary. So much of our collective effort until now has been focused on community remembrance projects, the soil collections, the historic markers, and installations, things like that. One of the common problems coalitions are facing is what happens next, right? Those two milestones are conducive and help to attract public attention and community engagement. But once those boxes are checked, what next? It gets a little bit harder. How do we keep people engaged? How do we attract more people to this issue? And how do we keep it in the public square? So I would say if today's conference has a theme, it's beyond the marker. That covers a lot of ground. For the coalitions, and it involves questions like the ones I just asked, right? What do we do next? How do we attract more people to the issue? How do we keep them engaged? And today we're going to learn about some very creative solutions on that front. One of the goals for us is to get the topic of racial terror into the public square. We can't confront the history without acknowledging it. And that's why we put so much effort into creating a program to introduce the topic, to make it easier for folks to learn about and to talk about it, make them comfortable with it. And then, hopefully, to act to dismantle the apparatus of white supremacy, which fuels it all. So the rubric of Beyond the Marker, it also refers to how racial terror is represented in the arts, right? On film, on stage, on gallery walls. And that is a critically important way to get people to consider the history of racial terror and think about these issues in an emotional way. And today we're going to meet we're going to get a chance to meet and hear from people, some brilliant artists, renowned artists, who are introducing that subject into their work. But first, we're going to consider a question that's really central to our mission: why do we remember? And the discussion is going to focus on the power of intentional remembrance as a catalyst for healing and education. Ashley Mann is over here. She's an attorney. She's CEO of Sandpiper Advisory Group. She conducted the workshop that we had yesterday with the coalition leaders and did a spectacular job. The firm specializes in cultural competency and training, community engagement, and historic tours with the goal of fostering understanding and healing through guided facilitation and educational experiences. Ashley's also on the board of the Jefferson County, Alabama Lynching Memorial Project, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you now.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is truly my honor and pleasure to be here with you today. Today I do want to make a few notes and remarks about why we remember and the importance of intentional remembrance serving as a catalyst for healing, education, and justice. History is not something that stays behind us. Events of the past impact systems and generations that are still in place today for all of us, with some of those things being the same atrocities, the same concepts, but repurposed, repackaged, and relabeled. Some things in history may be hard to remember, but it's unacceptable to forget. History and the act of constant and process of constant remembering is not something that is static. It requires us to remember history, but also to go back and fill in the gaps of the untold stories, researching and discovering to develop a fuller picture and discover the truth of what has occurred. The act of remembering and truly remembering goes beyond just dates and events. It's about holding space for the lives that were impacted, for the deep wounds and trauma that remains, and for the lessons that call to us across time. To remember is to confront, to acknowledge, and to honor. As one of our individuals in our meeting mentioned yesterday, Malia, wisely noted, we cannot hope for healing and reconciliation if we haven't first laid the foundation for truth. We know that truth is often selectively remembered, some remembering a nation's past in a way that comforts or reflects them, or only reflects partial realities. This selective memory impacts how we respond to present day injustices and can blind us to the inequities and injustices persisting today. The more accurately we know and engage with our history, the more we recognize the injustices in our present world. The awareness and the truth is foundational, not just for us here, but for generations that will follow us. Being intentional to remember brings focus not just to the events, but to the human lives, the real bodies, the real souls who were victimized and dehumanized. When we humanize these experiences, we cultivate empathy and recognition of a shared humanity. When we see each other clearly, we begin to move closer to empathy and bind communities together with courage required to address these injustices. Remembrance also has the power to shape identity and connectedness. When we look back with honest eyes, we see the ties that bind us across culture, nation, and time. For many people, acknowledging their own histories, as well as the joy, struggles, and triumph that come along with those, creates a sense of place and identity. When we confront these truths collectively, as each of us have done through our coalition work, we deepen our bonds and fortify our communities. Our role today, as interconnected as it is, requires us to develop a profound understanding of our collective, comprehensive histories. By understanding the histories of many cultures and people who share this world with us, we re-engage and cultivate that respect, that patience, the civic courage, and that humanity, which is essential for our shared future. As we reflect today and hear from the amazing artists that Will has presented with us, I would like us to consider the critical role of education in this work. If we want future generations to see more clearly, to act with empathy and respect, we must ensure that our schools and communities are attending and acknowledging these histories. Teaching history honestly and truthfully and comprehensively equips students not just with the facts, but also with moral insight needed to make thoughtful decisions. Every choice that they make, every choice that we make, every action that they take, and every action that we take as citizens reflect the understanding of shared humanity and justice. And in my closing, I want to urge each of us to see remembrance as both a responsibility and a privilege. When we hold space for past injustices, we honor those who endured them, acknowledge their humanity, and lay the path forward to understanding, healing, and justice. So we must remember not just for ourselves, but for the future generations who will carry the torch that we light today. Thank you.
One of the points of this work is to make sure people understand the connection between the white supremacy that led to the lynchings of 38 people in Maryland and thousands elsewhere. And I'm reminded of the William Faulkner quote, or it's at least attributed to him, about the past is never dead. In fact, the past is never past, which I think is beautiful and wise. I wonder if it's really William Faulkner, because I can't imagine he could be that pithy, to tell you the truth. But we'll go with it. So we're proud today to present the Maryland premiere of a short documentary called My Father's Name. The film focuses on one woman's horrifying discovery that her father had taken part in one of the nation's most notorious acts of racial terror. It was the torture and brutal lynching of Roosevelt Towns and Robert McDaniels in Duck Hill, Mississippi in 1937. I don't want to say too much more about it because that's going to reveal itself in the film. The reason the lynchings became notorious was because pictures taken that day at the site were among the first images, at least, of lynchings to be published. They were published in Time and Life and national news magazines, and then later in other newspapers. So we're going to show the film now, and then we'll have a panel to discuss it afterwards. I apologize, by the way, for the cursor bar being there. It's, if I had my children here, they would know what to do. So I blame them. So this is something that we need to talk about, and I'm happy to say that we have a wonderful panel now to discuss it. And if you would all come up and take your places, that would be great. First, Susanna Styron right here is the film's director, an award-winning writer, and both documentary and dramatic work. So anyway, Devontae Freeland is descendant of James Bowens, who was lynched in Frederick in 1895. Juliet Heinley is the great-great-granddaughter of the man who led the mob that lynched 15-year-old Howard Cooper in Towson in 1885. And moderating today is Dr. Terri Scott, Terri Ann Scott. She's the author of acclaimed Lynching and Leisure, Race and Transformation of Mob Violence in Texas. She's a member of the board of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and the director of the Institute for Common Power. Thank you all.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to go off script just for a moment here before we begin with this esteemed panel. I'm 50 years old. I have been researching, writing about, lecturing, discussing lynching for 25 years. For half of my life, I've dedicated much of my personal and my professional life to this. And this was extremely upsetting to me in all of the ways that it should have been. And I say that to say that even with all of my background in that, and I'm feeling that way, that if all of us, any of you are feeling uncomfortable, upset, horrified, lean into that. You're here to lean into that. And it is appreciated by every single person. We don't run from it. So many people want to run from it. But we cannot leave here today and leave it here. Today, as we sit in this room, there is a person running for the highest office in this country who threatens to implement laws that have everything to do with the legacy of lynching, with the idea of the criminalization and conflating that with blackness, with unchecked violence that people can use in nationwide stop and frisk policies, with eliminating the history of African Americans in this country, which is all of our history, with so much more, with threatening our rights as women, as people of color. And so I ask all of you to leave this room and do whatever you can, whether it is knocking on a door, calling people, voting, and be tired. I need you to be tired until 8 p.m. on Tuesday. I need you to be tired. And then take a minute, and whatever the outcome of this election, I need you to get to work again, because we've come a long way, but we still have work to do. Thank you. So we sit here today, and I want to recognize the incredible importance of this panel, because we have, who have come together, a person who is descended from an individual who was one of the leaders of a lynch mob, Ms. Juliet Heinley. We have Mr. Devontae Freeland, who is a descendant of James Bowen, who was lynched here in Maryland. And we have Susanna Styron, who created this incredible film that we just watched, that is a film about reconciliation and accountability. And when we're talking about the change that we can create in this society, all of you coming together to have this conversation, this is an example of that kind of change. So thank you all for being here. Mr. Freeman, I wanted to start with you. When and how did you first learn that you were a descendant of a victim of racial terror lynching, and what has that meant to you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the chance to be here and to speak a little bit. I believe I learned in 2020 during the pandemic when a couple of things happened at the same time. One, the pandemic happened, and I had just a lot more free time on my hands, and was at home and locked up like so many other folks were. Another thing happened, which is my grandmother passed, not from COVID-19, but she passed that summer, and I committed myself to learning more about her story and her family's history. My grandmother was born in Rockville Center, Long Island in New York, lived her whole life in New York and New Jersey. Didn't know much about her mother, who had died when she was young, and I took it upon myself to learn more about her mother in her honor, and learned about this long history of our family here in Maryland. The film shows the experience of going through microfilm and looking at old newspaper articles. Thankfully, I had the benefit of being able to do it online from the safety of home, and much of these newspapers are now digitized, and that's when I learned the story of James Bowens and his lynching in 1895 in Frederick County, Maryland. I didn't quite know how to process. I learned about my family story in Maryland, and then just a couple weeks later learned about this particular story. So I had no knowledge that I even had a connection to this beautiful state, I will say, by the way. I also have never lived in Maryland and still don't live in Maryland, but I've had the opportunity to come here and as a part of that research process to learn more and to begin to grapple with some of that complicated history, and have also had the opportunity to meet and work with some wonderful partners, both white, black, and other along the way, who are also equally as invested in doing this work and telling these stories.
That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Hindley, I'd like to ask you the same question. When and how did you first learn that you were a descendant of someone who was part of a lynch mob, and what has that meant to you?
Yeah, I was contacted out of the blue by the Maryland Truth and by the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project by Jennifer Lyles. She wrote me a Facebook message, and I teach, and I was doing one. It was also COVID time, so I was on the computer, and I got this Facebook message, and the message was informing me of this family history. And I felt it in my body immediately. When I read the message, there was no part, though it was, I didn't know this about my family, but when I got the message and read it, there was no part of me that was skeptical about it, even though it was from someone I had never met on a social media platform I don't really use that much. So yeah, in that moment, I just felt this extreme clarity about my family history, about this thing that I had suspected in a lot of ways, not a lynching in particular, but a direct connection to racialized violence. Mm-hmm. Just felt like, yep, that I knew that was back there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. I imagine that it must be tremendously difficult. It is inherently difficult to understand your connection to this history in this country. A recognition also that when we talk about it as African American history, indeed, no, it's history. It's everybody's history. So thank you for both of you for your work and making sure to keep this in the public sphere and talk about it, because it's easy to just not. So thank you. Ms. Styron, you're a storyteller, you're a writer. Your mind is probably filled whenever you're walking anywhere with a number of different stories that you can tell. You chose to tell a particular story, one that people quite literally right now in places across the country are attempting to codify against bringing such things to light. Why did you choose to tell this particular story?
I should know that. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. When I first actually heard Jan's story, I to be honest, I wasn't looking to tell this story. it was also during the pandemic, and I got an email from her out of the blue because I had been working on a film about someone who was from Duck Hill, and she had just sort of followed her research and somehow ended up with me because she was trying to find out more information. And when she told me her story, I was just so struck by it. And I will be honest, the first thing that struck me about it was the personal and emotional aspect of finding out something so horrible and unforgivable about somebody you love so much. And what do you do with that? How do you live with that, and how do you reckon with it? So when when I tell stories, they're always about larger issues, but come through the personal. So that's what struck me about it. Of course, it was immediately apparent and appropriate that it could not exist outside of the context of the historical, racial, social context it was in. So I explored it a little. I had to do a Zoom interview with her. I couldn't go see her in person. And I started doing research and looking and finding some archival footage to see if there was a film here. And when I then discovered the significance of the Duck Hill lynching historically, and then the fact that she had actually done something, which was to write a letter, that there was a narrative arc to her story, then I realized I could make a film about this, and that was that it was doable and it was really important to do, because the process of talking to her and research led me through a lot of the process that she went through about questioning my own unconscious racism and my own relationship to my whiteness and all sorts of things. You know, as a northern white liberal, I had just taken for granted about myself, and so it just became, very, very compelling and important to me to tell.
Has she, Ms. Frazier, revealed to you at all what the film has meant to her personally?
Yeah, it has meant so much to her because she's so brave. I mean, she didn't know what kind of response she would get for this. And she didn't care because she felt like the story needed to get out. She was willing to take whatever came to her. She wrote the letter. That was the most visible and vocal thing she knew to do. So when the film came out and people started seeing it and responding, it was like, okay, this story is out there. That is so important to her, and she's been very, very supportive and very grateful. And I feel like we together in the process of making the film came to a way of telling the story that made it not about white guilt, not about her asking for forgiveness, not about white people except in our responsibility and accountability, but that the response has been really great so far.
One more follow-up question to that. In the work I do, we spend a lot of time taking individuals, volunteers who are canvassing, educators through places like Georgia, Mississippi. And one of the things that we have discovered over the years is that we will go into local spaces like Philadelphia, Mississippi, and the tragedy of 1964 with the 3 civil rights workers who were murdered there is not taught in the school right there in the community where that happened. And so how has the film, or has it been received well in local communities in Mississippi? What can you tell us about its distribution and viewing?
It actually hasn't been distributed yet. It's just on the film festival circuit right now. This is only the second screening of this kind that we've had. We had one on Martha's Vineyard at the Martha's Vineyard Film Center, and we had a panel afterwards with Henry Louis Gates and Charlene Hunter Gault and a local rabbi, because we wanted to talk about the sort of spiritual aspects of it too. And that was fantastic. So this is the kind of event that the film is built for, that will create conversation. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. Yeah. That's the next, is to get it into schools, museums, right. Community centers, and.
Well, we are honored then that we all got to view it. Thank you. So the next question.
Can I just say one thing? I just want to acknowledge my executive producer, Connie Royster,
nice.
who is
Stand
here,
up for us.
who has had.
Stand up for us.
Stand up. Who, without whom I could not have made this film.
It's wonderful. The next question I'd like to ask all of you, and perhaps we can start with you, Ms. Heinley, and go down the line. As Will had mentioned, on Wednesday, there was an incredible revealing of the permanent exhibit that exists one floor above us that I hope all of you will make time to go and see today, about lynching in the state of Maryland. And it honors the 38 victims of racial terror lynching here in this state. As there is more research that is done by scholars, by the Equal Justice Initiative, and other organizations, we know that the numbers nationwide continue to increase, up to close to 6,000 African American victims of racial terror lynching. We also know, and we had a discussion about this, how young, for instance, should children be when they are exposed to this? How much do we expose this? All of these kinds of questions. Why is it important? And we know that in places like Texas and Florida and other places, they are eliminating our ability to be able to discuss this. This wouldn't be happening in a public university right now in the state of Florida or other places. Can each of you share with us why you think it is important and necessary for us to know this history, for us to memorialize the victims, for us to talk about this and teach others about it?
Yeah, I think it is critical to look back at these things so that we can recognize the patterns. Because while violence looks different in some, in a lot of cases now than in 1885, for example, it's still the same playbook, and it's still the outcome is the same. The outcome is the same, and the outcome is unjust. And so, without the ability to not only recognize the patterns, but see where we each sit in the pattern and in the system that perpetuates the pattern, how can we how can we make change if we're not willing to see that it's a continuation of the same issue?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Freeman?
I will be honest and say that I see the study and the recognition of this history as a call to action for the now, and very specific on the call to action, not just the call to healing or to discussing past traumas. Now, while this same type of mob lynching might not still happen in the same way today, there is still real racial injustice and racial inequality. And I see the discussion of these histories of where we have come as a way for us to ground the conversation of other issues that we can fix today, whether we talk about in the educational system, where Black boys and girls, when they deal with the disciplinary system in schools, will see different outcomes from their white peers, and that is documented consistently, where we talk about economic justice and access to good, quality, paying jobs, access to education, when we talk about housing in this country and the continued pushback against changing our zoning laws in ways that have allow us to build new housing, affordable housing, to fight homelessness, to fight economic instability. All of these are racialized issues. Black people in this country specifically continue to feel sort of the worst impacts of all of these issues. So I take this as an opportunity to say, hey, look at what has happened in the past. Here are the things that we can fix now. And as we talk about, checking our own biases, the next time one of us feels ourselves, willing to kind of push back against changing the zoning laws in our local community, I'll just say, well, remember this conversation we had here. There are still issues we can fix, and that's one opportunity that we can, continue to sort of fight and go against some of the economic inequalities, the racialized economic inequalities we see in this country. That's why I continue to sort of use this outcome and use this platform, because I think that there's more to be done, and anything that starts the conversation about the ways that we can continue to fight on some of these injustices, I will take that opportunity. So,
Mr. Freeland, I want to come back to that in just a moment, because you've laid out some extraordinarily important things. And so once we go through, I'd like to come back to that point in just a second.
Well, I don't really know how to follow that up. But I will just say that I feel like it's very easy for us in the present to go, well, that's over, that's in the past, that didn't have anything to do with me, and to not explore our own histories and our own connection to it and take any kind of responsibility for it. So that's why I tell this story, and what I think is important about keeping such things alive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all. So we have a group of individuals gathered here today who have been active in their own ways in their communities, in discussing, in promoting the injustices, in using their own particular platforms in varied ways to try to create change. And we have all of you sitting here today with disparate backgrounds, disparate experiences, but coming together to create one narrative of change and conversation. And this is what coalition building looks like. This is it exemplified. And so what do you sit here now, you have a platform. What do you ask of everybody in this room? If you could ask one or two or even three things, next steps on what we do with this. How do we create change? What do you ask? And I'd like to start with you, Ms. Heinley, and then I'll go to you, and I'll end with you, Mr. Freeman.
I need to think about this another minute.
Absolutely.
No, thank you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was going to say, I wish I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm hoping to explore and discover that. I'm sure Devante has ideas about that, but I don't feel like I'm in a position to even recommend such things.
Well, I think I'll recommend for you, if I may. I think distributing this film and what you're doing is one of those things. We don't each have to do everything, but we each do something. And the fact that you've made this and now it's on the circuits and you are working to have it distributed, that is that thing. And then we can ask all of you to let people know about this film and to encourage them to watch it.
Thank you.
Ms. Heinley, do you feel?
I have a feeling this is a preaching to the choir kind of room, so I won't get deeply, but I guess my ask would be that if a history like the one that's in my family is also in your family, to connect with it, and to not turn away from it or not diminish it as something that happened so long ago and it has no impact on who you are today. It does. That is a huge thing that has come to me in the last 2.5, 3 years since learning this information, is that what you choose to allow into your mind as part of who you are absolutely shapes who you are and your understanding of your family and where you come from. And it, to be able to just to be able to know that whatever it is it's very clarifying. So
Thank you. Mr. Freeland?
So I think my immediate call to action to the folks in this room, who I appreciate are here and are deeply interested and invested about learning about our past, my call to action to you would be whatever amount of time you spent today, driving here, however you got here, sitting here in this room today, my challenge to you would be to spend the same amount of time learning about the inequalities that still exist presently in the current day. There are a great set of statistics that are available about nationally as well as state by state about items like unemployment, homelessness, incarceration, educational outcomes. All of those stats are available segregated by race as well. I would really encourage you to just do some research. You can Google this, you can get it on your phone. If you don't know where to start, I would start with the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Census Bureau. and to learn about how some of these inequalities continue to persist today, and how they are extremely racialized. Right now, the unemployment rate in this country is extremely low as it is ever going to get. It's in the 3-something% overall. It's not 3-something% for Black folks. It's not 3-something% for Indigenous people. So that's my first challenge to you, is to just learn about where we actually are. What is the status quo now? And I think you will see some information that is surprising to you. That's at the national level, at the state level. I would also encourage you to learn a bit more about what is happening in your own community. That is often where you have the greatest chance to make a difference, to have an impact. Earlier, I spoke specifically about housing and zoning laws. Not to get too political, but there is a housing crisis in this country. There are not enough homes for the people that live in this country. There are 330 million people in this country. There are not 330 million beds. That is because we have not allowed us to build more homes. There's a movement, particularly in this state, for ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which is a movement that would allow us to build more homes on land that is currently not being used. There's also a significant movement of folks who are pushing back against ADUs being built in this state. It's called NIMBYism. Perhaps you've heard of it before. It is not to say that if you are a NIMBY that you are a bad person, going along with a similar theme that being a mean person or being a bad person is not synonymous with racism, which a lot of feature films in this country will conflate the two. If you're a NIMBY, I'm not saying that you're a bad person and that there's no room for you in the good place. I'm saying take this moment now, hear what I'm saying, and think about how if we build more homes in this country, we can, ease the economic burdens of families in this country, particularly Black and brown families in this country. We can, start to fight our homelessness issue in this country. That is one of the easiest ways for us on the local level to really actually do something here. Zoning laws are hyper local. They are one of the most local aspects of our government. The people that show up to those meetings for the local zoning boards are the people that don't want new homes to be built.
Brilliant. You've spoken to my heart as a professor. Education, you learn about these things. Knowledge is power, and then we move that into action. Absolutely. Can you please join me in thanking all of these incredible panelists today?
May I say just one thing?
Absolutely.
Because I am trying to get this out in the world, I'm going to do a little plug, which is
Please
just
do.
if you want to stay in touch and know what's happening with the film when it does become widely available, and maybe you can bring it into your community. The website is myfathersname.com, and you can just, if it's okay, I'm gonna put some cards outside too that people can get. But and you just scroll to the bottom and you can fill in a little sign-up thing, and then you'll get updates when things happen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Get to the polls.
Hang on just a second. Does anyone have any, before we release them, does anyone have any questions they would like? Yes. Just speak up because...
Wonderful. I so enjoyed all of this. When I watched the film, there was a picture of the lynching, and they were on the ground, chained to a tree. I've never seen that image before. Was that a precursor to the hanging up down from the tree? Or could you tell me a little bit about that?
So Roosevelt Townsend, Robert McDaniels, the men who were lynched by her father, among other people, were never hung from trees. They were both chained to trees. And one of them was burned to death. And the other were not sure, but they both died chained to trees and were not hung. The other pictures are from various different lynchings. I used, poetic license as a filmmaker to illustrate the general conversation at the end with the other pictures that weren't from their actual lynching.
Yeah. Lynching refers to the murder, the extrajudicial murder. They weren't all by hanging.
And I can add something to that. It's we have this kind of notion that all lynchings were hangings, but when you look at what has been a consensus definition, that much of it was kind of born over the last 120 years, but solidified in 1940 at a conference in Tuskegee, at Tuskegee University, when all of the major lynching organizations and individuals came together, the idea that it was a mob violence, mob defined by 3 or more people, that there was a lack of due process, and just going into the court doesn't count as due process, that there was an intention to kill based on tradition, race, or community, and that they died. And so they could be dead by burning or hanging, beating, shooting. All of those things qualify as a lynching, which by that definition, by the way, is why I always argue that lynching still exists. Ahmaud Arbery was lynched. George Floyd was lynched. Elijah McClain was lynched.
Yes, in the back.
To what, oh, thank you. Perhaps a hint to what many white people in this country carry, with either consciously or subconsciously. And I was hoping, if this is not too personal, if you could speak to that in terms of, was it that you had heard things from your family and so that's why you weren't surprised, or what led to that moment of getting that message and feeling what you felt?
Absolutely, yeah. So I got that message completely out of the blue, like I was saying. So it was March 30th, 2022. I will never forget that day. And as soon as I started reading it, it was like these slides were like clicking through my mind, and I was picturing like the Civil War sword that hung across my grandparents' fireplace. I was thinking about the fact that my grandfather used to tip airline stewardesses with Confederate money. Yeah, and this was humorous to him. These kind of conversations I had with my grandparents, who were not, they weren't, I'm connected through my great-great-grandfather, through my mom's mom. So, my grandparents were not part of the lynching in 1885, but just the kind of the way it just kind of the way that racism just kind of casually existed in the background like wallpaper in these rooms was that's why it didn't surprise me. That's why when I was very surprised by the message, by getting the message, but as I was reading it, I could just feel my stomach drop, and I knew what I was about to read. I knew I'm being told about this lynching because I am connected to it somehow. And sure enough, the message I got was very short, and it was, and it was an inquiry to ask if I would be open to talking more about it with the researchers for Howard Cooper's story in Towson. I think that was what you had asked about. Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely.
One more over here, yeah.
Me?
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much. This is really quick. To the documentarian, what you presented is profound, except that, as you said, a lot of places, those discussions don't take place. In some places where they were being taught or spoken of, they're being removed from the curriculum. So I'm wondering if you have started to think about crafting a toolkit to accompany your documentary, because otherwise it's just a movie without the provocation for discussion. Thank you.
Yes, definitely want to plan to have discussion guides made to go along with the distribution. At the moment, that requires time and money to do, which again has to be accumulated, and so it's definitely the plan as soon as we can put it in place. Very important. You're right.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Again, it was wonderful. You're dismissed. You're good. Thank you. You know, well, as they're taking their seats again, I just want to tip a hat here to all the people who pore over these records and these old newspapers and these books, you know, like Jenny Lynn Lyles and our friend Mike Dixon, Terri, so many. I mean, this is how we know, and it's a thankless task, probably all of the time. But we're grateful and we're fortunate to be the recipients of that scholarship. So thank you very much. So we're going to take a look now. We're going to see another way lynching's been portrayed in visual art. Ken Gonzalez Day is a world-renowned multidisciplinary artist. His work, and I'm going to quote this because it's a mouthful, considers the history of photography, the construction of race, and the limits of representational systems. He's had a solo exhibition at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in 2018, which is actually when I became familiar with it. His art is in galleries, you know, all over the world, and I think there's talk about having an exhibit in Baltimore in the next couple of years. And he's best known for his project called Erased Lynching, about which he will speak right now. Ken. So, you just, you know how this works, right? Just advance it. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much. All right. How is everybody doing? It's a little bit like, right? Kind of need a moment to clear your heads a little bit. And now for something slightly different, not completely different, but so I'm going to walk you through my work. So I'm a visual artist. I'm a professor. I teach at Scripps College as part of the Claremont Colleges in California. And my work is mostly on the history of lynching in California, which is mostly a Latino history. And part of my role here today is, I guess, to add to the conversation by giving you a peekaboo into another region and to another history you may not be familiar with. And part of my job has been, I guess, to share that history with as many people as I can. So while it doesn't specifically speak to the particulars, you know, of this town, it does speak to the larger. And I think you'll see overlaps between all of that. So one of the questions maybe that also I was sort of asked to invite you to think about is, as we move through the process of reconciliation, what is the role of the arts? How can the arts be a part of it? Or what can one do creatively to find an outlet? Are there ways of expressing one's experiences, whatever they are, in a way that you can share with others? And so my work mostly lives in museums, gets presented in galleries or other spaces, often without me there. So the work will be on the wall. And that's a way that I've been able to extend the conversation outside of Los Angeles. So I have work on view right now. If you go to the Smithsonian American Art Museum, you can see a grouping that I'm going to be showing today. And there's also work on view in Tucson and in Italy and in a few other places at the moment. And I have a website, which is just my name, kengonzalezday.com. So you can always just Google Ken Gonzalez Artist. It pops up. If you just can remember Gonzalez, you can pretty much find me. And the image you're looking at here is from the grouping that's at the Smithsonian. This is probably a lynching that took place sometime between 1914 and 1919 along the US-Texas border. This is a group of American soldiers who've just lynched a Mexican. And underneath, it was created as a postcard, and the postcard was mailed out to loved ones, right? And as you all probably are familiar with the history of lynching postcards, and so that certainly continued in the Southwest as well. So the bottom there, disguised bandit, you can see this idea of representing Latinos as criminals, as murderers, right? If you've watched the news at all, you know that one of the candidates for president continually evokes the idea of criminal Mexicans or Latinos as being polluting the blood of our country and all of that stuff. So I guess this piece, which was made in 2006, just reminds us that for over 100 years, people have used this argument against Latino and against black and brown people. For over 100 years, people have lynched black and brown people and others. So that's kind of what I'm bringing to your conversation today. And so, and maybe the other thing you'll see here is the projector's a little bit dark, but the guy on this side might even be Latino. So I was able to date the uniforms as U.S. military, so I know that they're U.S. soldiers, and it's never been okay for U.S. soldiers to kill people on either side of the border. You know what I mean? So the issue of migration and border wars, again, is an ongoing debate that we still have in this country. This idea of seeing people that arrive from the southern hemisphere as evil, as unwelcome, as polluting, all of those things are histories that we're familiar with, and that still are projected onto brown people today. So I have that experience. Many other people have that experience. So for me, creating this work was about trying to raise awareness of that history. You'll also notice I didn't make the photo. I just took a picture of the photo, right? So what did I do? I erased the victim from the middle. And so you can see, you don't get to see the twisted body of the Latino man hanging there. I don't allow you to see that. Instead, I've used the absence as a way of opening up a space for you to think about the missing histories. So all the missing histories, not just this individual history, but all of them. So the project, and remember, most people that encounter the artwork encounter it without me there. So like if you walked into the museum, would you eventually be able to figure this out? If you stood there long enough, would you begin to sense that something's going on? Would that open up a space for you to think about your relationship to current histories and past histories in a new way? So as an artist, as a visual artist, my job, I think, or the way I've understood it, is to try to create an artwork that speaks to my deeper concerns and interests, but to do that in a way that will stand on its own, right? So you may or may not like the artwork, you may or may not like the projects that I show, but I guess I'll just say, they're done with the best of intentions in trying to find a way to create visibility. I think, and then I guess, sometimes people have the technical question, how did you do that? Today, of course, now you can do it on your phone. But back in 2006, you had to use Photoshop. And so like my students in the future, they're gonna be like, oh, I could have done that in 2 seconds. So in a way, the work is already historically dated. It's sort of a strange thing to see that happening in my lifetime. But in the background, so I had to create the world behind the figure. And so part of that idea is that the absence is not missing. The absence is a presence. And I guess that's the idea I wanted to sort of introduce you to first as we look at work. Okay. And then I just included some quotes. You guys, I don't even need to read them to you because this group I know already knows all of this information. But this is from the EJI on racial terror lynchings. And I just thought it would be interesting to pull some recent quotes just to see what the language they're using today is. And you could read on your own, or do you want me to read it for you? You're good? I feel like you're pretty familiar with this history, but I didn't want to give a presentation without including it. And I think the previous panel talked about quite a number of these issues as well, about publicly confronting the truth about our history as the first step. So I'm trying to bring an additional piece of that history. I also wanted to highlight the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which this was a quote from Art Forum, and again, I'm sure many of you have been there or know of it. But I put it up there just to remind us of the date. So my project started in the early 2000s, and the memorial didn't open until 2018. And as you probably know, it does not include, it includes, I believe, 800 counties, but none of them in California. So this Western history is not included in that. Many people call it a national museum, but it's not the nation. California is a part of the nation too, and as are other Western states, and Latinos are Americans too. So I wanted to highlight that though a lot of work has been done, there is still more work to be done. And then here are just some very simple things that I will read, just because I think they're important in terms of at least framing my intentions. Individuals of all races, genders were lynched in the United States since its founding. According to the EJI, and this is an old number, but 4,400 African Americans were lynched in the U.S. The history cannot be separated from the history of slavery, settler colonialism, or the displacement of native peoples from their traditional homelands. And that's the data that I pulled that from their site. And then current scholars include over 600 cases of lynching of Mexicans, Mexican Americans, along with Chilean heritage. My own research also documented Native Americans, Asians, specifically Chinese and Filipino, African Americans, and various immigrant communities, including Jews. So the 600 cases, even if we take the 6,000 number, 1 out of 10 people lynched in America was Latino. Did you know that before today? So that's why I'm here. So I'm adding that piece of the equation to it. Again, that number is is a very low estimate. We can talk about that more later. And then the last part, Latinx or Latina individuals can be of any race, multiracial, multi-ethnic, or indigenous to the Americas. Therefore, the history cannot be separated from the history of slavery, settler colonialism, or the displacement of native peoples from their traditional homelands. And again, I just add that to expand your thinking about racial difference and to recognize that there are links between these communities that don't always get emphasized or visualized for us. And then this is just your summary of the materials you're covering here, or I assumed you would have covered in this week. So basically looking at Maryland specifically, you have the list on the back of your brochure with all the individual cases. And then as far as how, or one of the elements of why I might be here was because I did a project for the Atlantic on 2 lynchings from Maryland. And so this is, I'll show you the images. Basically, so the Atlantic ran an article in, did I put the date up there? No, of course I didn't. It's in recent years. And they had approached me to see basically if I could include 2 images from Maryland into my erased lynching series. And they had this article they were working on, which you can find online, which was addressing 2 of the cases, right, from the list. So and in this talk, I'm not including any of the bodies in the images. I feel like if you need to see the images with the bodies, you can Google those pretty easily. And so my project is trying not to repeat that at this time. So basically, there's how it looked in the magazine. And that was the full image I created for them. You could imagine the body was hanging from the pole in the middle, and you see the people looking out. The only image that existed of this was from a newspaper that was published at the time. Nobody could find the original negative, and this newspaper was in the collection of an individual who then lent it to the Atlantic. So even getting this image was an incredible journey. And then the second image, there's the Atlantic spread with as they cropped it, and then there's the full image. In this particular case, the body had been burned, and so I just removed any traces of the body on the ground so that we just, again, have this opportunity to look at the mob, right, and to think about their actions. And one of the reasons I did this was by basically giving us permission to look at the crowd and to figure out how whiteness works, to think about the mechanisms that made these events possible. And in doing that, if their body was there, we would look away, as we should, right? We would not be able to sustain that attention. Whereas here we can really see what they're wearing. We see there's kids. We can see there's people of all ages. We can see that this is not just a group of angry men. This is a broad spectrum of people. Often you'll find women in the crowds as well, and you'll find young girls, young boys. So it often was a family spectacle. And just to remind everybody, if we take the 6,000 plus the 600, and we assume every lynching had at least 100 people, which is not a big number, that would be 600,000 Americans participated in a lynching, right? So that's a lot of descendants if you add all of the people to that. And again, we haven't even started that work. So that's kind of the conversation to come, I suppose. So those were the specific Maryland references, basically taking the history that was shared with me and trying to create something that would present your history in a larger context. And this is now the backstory of how I came to the Erased Lynching Project. So I wrote a book on the history of lynching in California, in which I document over 354 cases of lynching in the state of California. Prior to this, the NAACP only recorded 50 cases. In those 50 cases, they recorded 48 as white and 2 as colored, which is the language they used at that time. Meaning it didn't include any Latinos, Native Americans, Chinese. It didn't include any of the other groups that were primarily targeted. So that's one of the reasons why most people, when they think of the Wild West, they think of it as being sort of white-on-white violence or as some kind of something different from lynching, right? And the argument here is that we need to expand our understanding of that as well. Particularly, it was great to get that definition for us to kind of loosen our thinking around how we understand a lynching. In my particular case list, I did keep it to cases that included a rope. So they were all hung from a tree. The lynchings there were different than the East Coast. And I should also tell you that it's a history before the history you know. So California lynchings begin in 1850 and continue basically through the largest period is up through 1900 as the population grows. So I published a book, which you can, at this point, still find online, and a lot of the data is available on, you can find PDFs of it online as well, or if you have access to a university library, of course, you can get it there, and it's on Amazon, too. Sorry that they have that light on. Could they turn the light off? I think then you can see the slide better. Anyway, so the project began as U.S. Allied forces were dropping bombs on Iraq. And so when you walked inside, this hangman's tree is the only marker in the state of California to this history. So you guys are so far ahead of California. You think of California with all its liberal progressive thinking, has none, no markers, no history. It's not taught in any schools, even though I've published on the topic. And so here's the marker, and you see this mannequin they hang, which has like a mustache. So they kind of rehang this guy every year as a kind of community event. And at the day that I was there, inside the bar, the bartender had hung a little Osama bin Laden doll from the window. And I walked in there with my camera, and I was like, hello. I thought I'd just give you very quickly, a few early images. This is the first kind of lynchings in California in 1856. So California became a state in 1850. 1851, they start lynching people, basically. You can see the kind of turnout. There's before photography, so it's a drawing of the crowd. Just to give you a sense of the scale of it and the kind of community buy-in at that point. And then this is 1856, again, very early, right? That just became a state. You see these are the actual vigilantes. Here they took over. At that time, it's before there was each city had its own armory, and the armory held the arms in the event that the community had to defend itself. So they took over the armory, grabbed the arms, and then proceeded to lynch a number of white guys. And I have the complete list on my book, 1856. And then this side here is just showing an illustration from 1883. The difference being that by the 1880s, you can see that they begin to wear masks. So by 1870, you see accounts shift. In some of the early ones, the community is basically without a mask. And by the 1860s and 70s, people start wearing masks and hiding their face. So they know there's something wrong, right? They know it's not proper behavior. And you hear accounts of that, about the numbers that were masked or not. And then here's the first African-American lynched in California. 1851 or 1852. It's from a notebook of this German, Carl Friedrich Christoph, tied the rope in at least 2 lynchings. He was a German sailor, arrived basically during the gold rush and stayed. And so this is the only record we have of it. You can sort of see it barely kind of floating there on the... Oh, so here's the quote from Dame Shirley, who was there and witnessed it or witnessed accounts of it. The execution was conducted by the jury and was performed by the throwing of the cord, one end of which was attached to the neck of the prisoner across the limb of a tree standing outside Rich Bar graveyard, when all who felt disposed to engage in so revolting a task lifted the poor wretch from the ground in the most awkward manner possible. The whole affair, indeed, was a piece of cruel butchery, though that was not intentional, but arose from the ignorance of those who made the preparations. In truth, life was only crushed out of him by hauling the writhing body up and down several times in succession by the rope which was wound round a large bow of his green-leaf gallows. And again, just one very telling description, 1851. You know what I mean? So this is before the history that we mostly think of. And already it's been formalized. And then, okay, we've talked a lot about microfilm. So how did I find 354 cases if all the books are wrong? The only way you could do it was by doing the research. So back then, Microfilm had not yet been scanned. This was in the early 2000s. So I had to go in person to all the different libraries and go through the microfilm reels. So I read the newspaper from 1849 to 1879 for the city of San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and the steamer edition. And that means I've read every single day because they didn't have indexes. And often what I would find is a description like this. You know, a Mexican hung, the altar contains a letter which blah, blah, blah. And sometimes these would get reprinted in different newspapers, so it's very difficult to track down the dates. So part of the job was also to try to eliminate overlaps to make sure that I had individual cases. And I only included cases where I had two sources. Here, just a brief moment to remind you of the border as a site of conflict that continues to be a site of conflict today. These are vigilantes hunting along the U.S.-Mexico border in 1915, and here they are from like 2019. So, and they're still there today. So there at one point there were over 140 vigilante groups along the U.S.-Texas border, U.S.-Mexico border. And so a lot of Americans still are members of vigilante committees today. And again, that's something we don't hear a lot about. This image from 1933 in California is just to remind me to highlight the impact of photography. As a photographer, I am also, I think about the responsibility of all of us who distribute images, right? Create and distribute images, whether we're journalists, professors, educators, that we have a responsibility as well. And here you can see that they've just lynched two white men for a kidnapping case, and they're ecstatic about it, right? You can see that they're smiling for the camera. They've scratched away bits of the bark so they could take it home as a souvenir. And this idea of souvenir taking you guys are familiar with from the larger history of lynching. Also, the use of photography, 1933. This is in keeping with the spectacle lynchings that you're familiar with. They estimate over 6,000 people at this lynching, which was also announced on the radio. And I often show this to my students with images of January 6th, where you see the mob of insurrectionists trying to literally take over the nation's capital, to say that things that we might see as individual values are not shared or may not be shared by others in our communities. And so part of the work is also about just realizing that, I guess. And that was something that January 6th alerted me to, that I hadn't really thought about, that democracy might end in my lifetime. So this image, also the commercial flash photography was not available until about 1930. So any images you've seen of lynching at nighttime were lit by other means before that. So often they would use torches, fireworks, car lights, all kinds of stuff. And again, I write on that in the book at more length. Here's a description from the newspaper. I often describe this as the first description of Latinos in California from this time period, 1854. Their bodies are now swinging to the limb where they were executed and will probably continue to boast the wonder gaze of the public until time and decomposition shall allow them to fall to pieces. The reason I show that quote is that's a visualization of Latino bodies. 1854, they already hated us, right? And that narrative representation gets replaced by photographic representations in time. But I think one has to recognize that there's a relationship between the images that are created and the desire for those images. They don't come out of nowhere. They reflect an ideology. So this grouping is from a 1920 lynching of 3 men, one of whom is the last Latino lynched in California, at least that's documented. And this is the tree. So on the postcard on the far end is the original image with the bodies removed. That was sold as a postcard. The middle image is from the police detective who had a whole set of these images inside his notebook, which basically helped, and again, I write on this more in the book, but basically helps to support the idea that this was actually a police killing, and that the reason that there's no crowd visible is because it would have been probably police officers or people connected to it. And so this is an image of one of the officers standing next to the tree the next day. And again, if you saw the journal, you would see that he had many different versions of the image that were done as prints, not as postcards. So he had them first. And then the last image is when I went out to look for the site. So again, as I mentioned, I'm a photographer, so part of the project then turned into looking for some of the sites. It's called Searching for California Hang Trees, and I will emphasize that the idea of searching or searching for as opposed to finding, because the fact that there's no record of these cases is not my fault, right? So what I've been trying to do as an artist is to create an awareness of an invisible history in a place where it's very hard to get people to want to know about it. So it turns out, you see, sorry that the projector is not calibrated, but on the very first, the dark one with the tree, there's a little reflection in the background. Anyway, there's a tombstone, and the tombstone is in this other contemporary image. So the lynching took place in a cemetery, and I was able to triangulate the location by using there were multiple photos taken showing different tombstones, and the tombstones are still there, so I was able to triangulate where it would have been. So this tree is, they cut down the original tree, but this tree has grown up in almost the identical spot, within inches, right, of the original lynching site. So from my perspective, that was a site worthy of photographing because it speaks to that history. All right, and then this one is also, and I'm sorry the projector's a little bit dark. In the original image, you can see a bit of the background as well. This is an actual lynching tree, or believed to be, from the 1850s. Multiple men were lynched on this, including probably 2 Mexicans. And the tree died at some point, and so you see it's kind of bound onto a cement pole with some metal, so that the tree is dead. And they've put it on, and actually the tree, they've moved it across the street from its original location and put it near a little hotel, so you can go stay there. It's like a roadside attraction. And the marker has no text on it because it's vanished over time, so there's actually no information on it, right? This is from the larger series, Searching for California Hang Trees, where I went out looking for sites. In this particular case, the titles are taken from the research, so from the archival research. About 100 yards from the road, the man was taken and hanged. And so this tree was about 100 yards from the road, and that seemed like a spot. I don't know that this is the actual tree. There could have been another tree somewhere else. But I know that it was in this valley, and I'm pretty sure that that's the same road that was there in 1850, right? There's no new road. So this is for sort of a larger witnessing of the site, and I think of it all as being sort of the trees as witnesses more than weapons. Some of the sites, like just outside Hermosa, all the information I had was they took him just outside Hermosa and they hanged him to a tree, blah, 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 no persons identified. So this is that road. There's only one, it's now a ghost town. There's only one road that goes into the town, so I'm on that road getting the picture. And again, I'm just trying to create a framework to allow us to begin to visualize a history that we don't know about, or many people don't know about. This one is really, a lot of the times they would just say, they took him from the jailhouse. The majority of them were already in custody. They would take him from the jailhouse, and it'll say like 100 yards or a mile down the road. And so then often I will look for a tree that's old enough. California, they often identified the tree, oak trees, pine tree, whatever. And the oak tree grows very slow. So if a tree is still alive today, we can date it, basically. So I know this tree has to be at least 250 years old, and that would put it in the range. And there's no other trees this size nearby. So again, it may not be the tree, but it's my attempt to look for that. That tree was alive at the time. And so that tree is at least a witness to the crowd. And of course, some of them I didn't know where. So it's just a wide open expanse. So I was very happy. Some of them, I was able to find a few actual trees, as I showed you in the beginning, and since some of them are more about the experience of looking for them. And then in LA, I had the opportunity to then present one on a billboard. So again, there's no markers in the city of Los Angeles, which has more lynchings than almost any other city in the nation. So I put the tree back into the landscape, and you could actually see it from the freeway when you were driving by. And at night, it was lit up, which your projector's a little dark in terms of the colors, but you get the basic idea. That's the billboard. And then sometimes when they're exhibited, they've been shown with the trees. And then I did a series called Memento Mori, where I invited young men, because the majority of these men and boys were between like 18 and 24. You know, a lot of them were very young, and so I wanted to sort of represent that idea of I guess the lost opportunity, right? The kind of histories that were lost, and so I would. Again, these kids didn't know about the history either, so the first part of the project, I would explain to them what I was doing. Then I'd say, you're standing in for a missing victim, and I'm going to take the picture. I'm going to count to 3 and take your photo. Give me whatever reaction you think you want to. So I was trying to find a way to represent a missing history. And again, the colors are actually beautiful in the real photos. So anyway, and I was shooting on film with an old-fashioned 8x10 camera, so it was, you know, it was the kind of thing I didn't know what I had until later after I got it. So that's just the same, just different slides. I wasn't sure if they were better slides. And that leads us into the erased lynching series. So that was the actual tree on the far left, on your left. And then this is the tree that grew up next to it, and that's the erased lynching postcard in the middle. Very quickly, I'm using the NAACP numbers at the top of that. So NAACP has different numbers from EJI in terms of their number of lynchings for the United States. This is a recent search. I checked their website, so 4,400 is what they have. And then I'm adding the 600 of Latinos. And then basically all of this just to show you that Latinos are 1 out of 10. I also have Native Americans, 41 African Americans, Chinese, white, Filipino, and so on. So that's the total of the research. And then at the very bottom, you see there were also some immigrants, 1 Canadian, 1 Danish, 1 English, 2 French, so on and so forth. So these are back to, basically, some of them go back to Gold Rush era, which, and then in terms of, you're talking about markers, we have 0 markers in the city of Los Angeles. So these are all the locations. I know the spots. I could tell them where. I know the names. I know the dates. I know everything. And I've known it since 2006. And I've met with mayor's office, and I've met with everybody, and I don't have a network of people. I'm just me by myself. And it hasn't been very effective at making change. So this is the site. You see where that temple, the monument there is to the Mormons. That's the site where they hanged all of these, hanged and lynched. So the top group are all Latinos that were lynched on that site, meaning they had no semblance of a trial at all. And then the bottom names are all people that had some version of a trial, but it may not be what we would consider to be a fair trial. And those would need to be looked at. So I keep them separate as they were separate in the original case list. And this man was the last man hanged in Los Angeles, 1883. He was 21 years old. You know, when I found that image, I thought it was a beautiful portrait of a young guy in a dapper suit, and then I flipped it over and it said, "Last man hanged in Los Angeles." I also made a walking tour. If you ever come to LA, it's on my website. It's free. A lot of school groups use it. So Google searches tell me that about 16,000 people have used the walking tour. And the walking tour has images like this from this PowerPoint, and then it has a little text for each. So a lot of school groups go. High school, it's not taught in high school or anywhere. And you know, LA is majority Latino at this point. California is almost majority Latino, and yet there's no representation of these histories for that community. So I've tried various things, and then I thought, well, let me just make it and just put it out there, because what if I get hit by a bus or something, you know? Yeah, thank you. So here's, just to give you a sense of what's on the tour, if you ever come and do it. This is one of the locations at the intersection of Aliso and Alameda Street. And this is a quotation from the newspaper when he was lynched in 1871. "A butchery such as he committed was enough to stir our citizens to call aloud for instant vengeance. This was no ordinary case. A helpless and feeble woman, a mother with 2 children playing around her, is set upon by this devil in human form, mangled and mutilated until life is extinct for the purposes of gain. No death is too horrible for such a monster, and the yawning gates of hell open to receive him none too soon. He was 15 years old." And there was no trial, so we don't know that they got the right guy, you know what I mean? Apparently they stabbed him about 30 times as they put the rope around his neck, dragged him up the street, and then hanged him to the corner. And again, this was the one I was trying to get a marker because I have a lot of documentation. I have newspaper articles. I thought this one, because some of them is hard to prove. Like, I get that there's a lot of hoops to getting a historical marker dedicated, but I felt like this one had a good amount of information. This is the location of the Chinese massacre. If you weren't familiar with it, 1/10 of the Chinese population was lynched in one day in 1871. And that's the location. There is works, they're working on a memorial for that. So the city is working on that as we speak, or actually a group of citizens with some, I don't know if they have city funding, but they have city support. And then this is the erased lynching series. This is how they're presented. So back as postcard size, often presented in a grid. The reason I do the grid is because in some of the cases, if you just ran into one image, you may not know what it was. But I felt like if you see 15 and you spend time looking at it, I've never had anybody say they didn't know what it was about. So people can figure it out by getting the clues between the images. And there's all the individual details on the far side. And I have many of these on my website, so I don't need to go over each case with you today. I know you're probably all getting hungry by now. So there's the back of the card. This is what he got. And I didn't do any, I just took a picture of it. I didn't do anything, I didn't alter it in any way. And the one I showed you earlier. Somebody was asking me about this. This is Tombstone, Arizona. And this was John Heath, white guy, and 1884. And you get the idea the body was hanging from the telephone pole. And what I like about this one and why I put it in here is just to show that nobody is looking at the body. They're looking at the photographer. So if you think about the role of photography in shaping this history, shaping a market for this history, 1884, this is one of the earliest lynching images in the country. There's a few earlier. And again, that could be another talk about the role of photography in shaping, informing racialized violence in America. This is the 1933 double lynching of the two kidnappers. You can see the ladies all dressed up in a fur coat. And this was often presented as a very large mural showing the full crowd. Here's how it was presented in Paris at the Palais de Tokyo. It might be hard to tell, but it's actually 20 feet tall by 60 feet wide. And you can see I put the image in the corner so that when you walk in the museum, you're not just walking by and looking at a flat image on the wall. You're walking into a space. And they're basically life-size figures, so you're engaging in real time, in real space with the crowd. I was trying to get away from the sort of passive looking and to trying to get ways that people could further imagine themselves, where would they be in this scene? Would they be, And then here's the way I showed it in LA. Again, the projector's a little bit dark, but I did a mirror version on one side so that the individuals were reflected in the mirror. And in LA, about 60,000 children came, basically. All the high schools and grade schools go get a tour through the museum. So it was the only chance for the young Latino kids to see their history. But a lot of them went in the room to play because it was fun with the mirror. And so you'd have these adults looking at the artwork and these kids running around. And just the whole invisibility of Latinx history in LA was striking to me. So that was very specific to that place. This was here at the Smithsonian, at the National Portrait Gallery, where they included, at the National Portrait Gallery, which also has not a lot of images of Latinos, a room that was about the absence, right? It was about missing histories. And I felt that was a very successful part of the exhibition. And that show was up while Trump was in office. And in fact, the museum, if you remember that the government was closed down, it closed on the exhibition, so it didn't get to finish its run. Two Italians being lynched in Florida, and of course, though we don't think of them as racially different, at that time they were ethnically, marginalized, of course. And then here's a second grouping. This one includes, I'm sorry I don't have a pointer here, but you probably recognize the middle one. There's this. So the first group was really almost all Western, and I felt like that was actually, I needed to include the whole nation. So then the second and third groups include all of, so they include African American lynchings, they include all lynchings that I could find. And all of the images are from original images that I have or archival copies. I didn't scan anything out of a book or anything like that. And I have images that I have not seen reproduced anywhere else yet. So in some sense, and some of those still need more research. So I've also basically I have an archive of materials that I collect and share with scholars. So you see a range there. Some of you might know some of them. Here's the fourth set. There's 5 of the fifth set. And there'll be a show of this set at the National Gallery of Art, also not far away, but in a couple years, but it's not scheduled yet. So the project, just to say the project continues. They're very hard to find images, as you know, so as I kind of keep doing the research and trying to add to it. Here's another one on just showing the U.S.-Texas border. The 3 bodies were on the ground. After they dragged them and, at the back. This is what we do with these people down here. And as you may have noticed, some of the groupings include the backs, so that I'll have like 1 or 2 backs so that people get a sense that they were postcards and can understand the series. And then that would be all 5 sets of them. If they have never been shown together, so if that's what it would look like, though, currently. All right, and I think that's it. All right, so we have a few minutes for questions, and then we get to go to lunch. So hang in there. I know it's been a long morning. Let that settle in for a minute. If you have questions about any of the images.
Anyone?
Sure. Sure.
What information is provided for the viewer of the exhibit so they know that it's a lynching?
So the information that was in the slide, has the details of each case, and that's the label. And so I always insist that it has the full information so that somebody can look it up. And many of the well-known cases, my students will just Google them. So they can get a lot of that very directly. And then my book, of course, has a detailed list of all the cases that I cover there. But yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you. How do I do that? Okay, I guess it's the back. Oh, yes. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, because I don't know how to.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering about the early lynchings of the white guys. Were those because of the heinous crimes, or there wasn't a racialized or other kind of thing? And I noticed also that a lot of the people were from European countries. So if you could explain a little bit more about that,
Sure.
I find that interesting.
Sure. So in 1850, when California becomes a state and gold is discovered, basically we have migrants coming from all over the country. And so people at that point are identified as Yankee if they were born in the U.S. eastern states, or they were identified by their nationality. So in the case of Latinos, there were Mexicans, and then there were Mexican Americans, which were identified as California, because there were people already living there, and then there were also new arrivals. So I tried to be as specific as I could about where they came from if I had the information. And I thought when I started I wouldn't be able to identify the racial background of people, but I was able to identify all but 20 of the 300 and whatever. So actually there was a lot of information out there. As far as the who got lynched and why, yes, there are cases where, and certainly in 1850, the court system is not yet fully established. So, like I throw a soft pass on some of those early cases. The big vigilante ones I showed, 1854, are crimes that seemed to be well documented. They had a full vigilante court hearing, basically, which was individuals who ignored the courts, created their own system, and then lynched them instantly. But that so-called rigor, and that's just 4 cases that were sort of nearly quasi-legal. After that, everybody just uses the language of a vigilance committee to justify acts of killing. So what we find a lot is it's the police are often involved in some of them. People that were considered to be unwelcome in society, so Jews, criminals, of course, kidnappers. There's sometimes there was things around rape and the same kinds of things you find in the NAACP case list. In majority of cases, they were being held already. So the community has taken them out of the court system because in some cases they were given a life sentence and people didn't think they should get that. And that was like in 1870, which was pretty progressive. And then at other cases, they were frustrated with the legal system itself. You know, people have the right to appeal. If you've watched the news lately, we have a particular felon out on the loose right now. Sometimes the judicial system is slow, and there's a number of cases where that slowness led to the community intervening. In all cases, they're still not legal killings. It's never okay to kill people of any race. And so from my perspective, the lynching is not race specific. Lynching can be applied to everybody. And I should also highlight that the NAACP, in its original list, which most people use, includes 1,400 people identified as white. So we never see that information repeated. So that 6,000 plus 600 plus 1,400, you know what I mean? The numbers are higher. And I feel that by erasing, by not talking about all of those histories, we repeat history by always ending up with the same conversation. So what has to happen is a larger, you know, a very nuanced look at all of the full range of cases once we're further along. Thank you. The guy with the microphone's there. Yeah. 2 minutes. One more? That one? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. And as a fellow researcher, I just want to commend you for the work that you've done. It's incredible. That's wild. I just was curious, after, some 20 years, right, of researching this, discussing this, what are some changes or some things you've noticed about reception from the public, reception from municipal leaders to your work? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So far, I have met with the mayor's office a couple times. I've met with a few people, but basically, they're not convinced that these Latino victims weren't all somehow bad, or they're not sure that they need to be memorialized, I guess, in the end. And part of it has to do with funding too. I think that it's pretty much just me. So so far I haven't had any success at getting anything further established. There was a question. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Last one. Go ahead. Just.
Your work has given us the opportunity to take a good look at those mobs, those people that are looking at this entertainment. We don't get a chance to do that. And it was significant that the bodies were not there so that we could have the opportunity to see those faces, to see the joy in the people who were doing these crimes and getting away with it. This was a mass crime, but also seeing children and women and young people and old people celebrating the death and the trauma that this brought communities as tolerant. So I appreciate you and your work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a great place for lunch.